Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our board members, the Chief Constable and his team, who are all joining us through Zoom today. Also welcome to all of you who are watching this live stream policing board meeting at home, in the office, or wherever you may be. Chief Constable, this is our first board meeting since the attempted murder by the new IRA on your staff member, the arson attack at an officer's home in Larne, and also the disorder that resulted in a serious level of officer injuries. We trust that all of those who have been injured or traumatised by the recent events are getting the support needed, and also recognise that these events have undoubtedly brought unforeseen challenges for you and for your PS&I leadership team. Organisationally, these incidents focus our minds on the challenges faced in delivering of the service and the environment that the police service operates in, and also the need for the service to be properly resourced to meet the demands in the time ahead. Today we've been looking again at the budgets. Whilst it is welcome that an additional 12.3 million has been allocated by the Executive, which will allow numbers to return to around 7,100 officers, it is still far short of the 7,500 promised, and it's now key that the additional monies are provided to allow numbers to be restored to this. Last week, the Minister of Justice confirmed continued funding for the Tackling Paramilitarism programme, and within that it is positive that further funding is being allocated to the task force. The Director General of the NCA will be joining us next month, and it is clear that a lot of proactive work is ongoing within the team, with successes against those who are profiting from criminality. As you're aware, HMI inspectors have been here at the board working on the review, which we asked the Justice Minister to commission, and we are expecting that to be published in the week commencing 17th of May. With the end of year crime figures due to be published shortly, it is timely to read the Criminal Justice Inspectorate's follow-up review on domestic abuse. This year's performance plan remains focused on this issue. The number of domestic abuse crimes is increasing, and the types of crimes are becoming more severe, with approximately a fifth of all sexual offences and a third of all violent offences being domestically motivated. PS&I has reported to the board on actions and activity to support implementation of the inspector's recommendations, and this is an area of work that will be kept under review by the board in the time ahead. Chief Constable, there's been a lot of focus on the use of stop and search through our human rights monitoring and the work of the board's performance committee. Last week, a new survey was launched, which was developed by NICCY and others to look at the perceptions and experiences of young people between the ages of 11 to 18, their experiences of the P&I use of stop and search powers, and what lessons PS&I can learn. The board welcomes this work, and it has been agreed that a similar survey will be carried out with PS&I officers to inform a conference on the issue with young people and PS&I officers, hopefully later in the summer. So we encourage young people to become involved in that survey. We had discussions today on a timeline for filling the remaining vacancies within the leadership team, and the board will be moving ahead with competitions to appoint to the remaining PS&I senior officer positions, and later in the year to appoint assistant chief constables. Chief Constable, a legacy report is published today from the Police Ombudsman, and the judgment earlier this week also made significant comments regarding the handling of past cases and approach. These, along with other cases pending, remind us of how long overdue need for commitments made around handling of legacy to be delivered. So, Chief Constable, having said all of this, it's over to you and your comments on your report.
Well, thank you, Chair, and to members watching this afternoon's meeting, obviously joined by Mark and Pamela. I think firstly to address specifically, Chair, the comments you made about the troubling attacks and disorder, not only just in relation to what we saw on our screens, but obviously the specifics with the threat to a part-time officer, stroke member of police staff, and a neighbourhood colleague with the firebombing of cars in Larne. I think suffice to say, we really appreciate both your comments as a board and also widespread public support for officers doing jobs in very difficult and trying circumstances. And also the fact that certainly collectively, Mark, I and Pamela in different ways have been out and about across the country, seeing frontline colleagues to offer them support, to listen to their experiences and to make sure that any commitment that we have made in the welfare and protection space are being met. So we may come back to that later. Clearly, the report is there before you today to form the framework for discussions, and obviously we're happy to take questions, but I think a few specifics to pick up on before we do that. I want to begin the meeting today by acknowledging the report issued by the Police Ombudsman this morning and saying that obviously our thoughts are first and foremost with the families of Patrick Rooney, Hugh McCabe, Daniel McLarnon and Michael Lynch. I think it's fair to say that given the passage of over 50 years, we must rely on the report of the Ombudsman, who has the statutory responsibility to examine and report upon police conduct and who has been investigating this incident for many years. We accept the findings in this report and we accept that the Ombudsman has found that the deaths to be without good reason. We of course respect and acknowledge the hurt and suffering of each of the bereaved families, and we offer our sincerest and heartfelt sympathies to them today for the loss that they endured. Reflecting on some of your other commentary, Chair, and specifically in relation to concerns from the PUL community, I want to stress we are listening and trying really hard to understand specific concerns about two-tier policing. Clearly, some tensions remain high, but we're working with a range of stakeholders to maintain calm in the areas affected by recent disorder and show that we're committed to fair, even-handed and legitimate policing. But I think we're also keen to see how we learn the lessons of how we've dealt with other critical issues in the last 18 months, and specifically look at in the way that we responded to Black Lives Matter or indeed the South Armagh review. Working with colleagues on the board and elsewhere is now the time to sort of reach out and say, is there a specific piece of work we've got to do to address how policing affects that community and where we need to sort of listen and make improvements. In terms of the detail of the report, I think it's a good opportunity to highlight some innovation today, such as the wellbeing hubs, and pay tribute to Superintendent Arthur Davidson, who's very much been the guiding light behind these. And also, you touched upon it before with Lynn Owen's appearance next month, but the continuing evidence of significant drugs hauls as we continue our fight against serious and organised crime. I think it's an opportunity to say that we now look forward, as everyone does, to the reopening of the economy and doing our bit to support communities across the country and investor comments in a brighter future. A few specifics just to take out of the report for members before we take questions. I know it's been an issue for some time, but we have now met the target set by the board for reducing sickness levels, and it's paying tribute to the people who work collectively to help do that, as well as the commitment of officers and staff of coming to work in the COVID environment. We're now able to announce that we'll be able to recruit nearly 500 more officers this year, and that last year has seen the largest number of drug hauls in the history of the service. We provide an update in the report, obviously, on recent disorder and can take commentary on that, as well as the more specific stuff of policing COVID in the optimistic look that regulations may soon be eased, subject to what the executive determine. Clearly, we are continuing hard the fight against serious and organised crime, and some of the specifics have come up recently in the way that there are some callous criminals trying to exploit the vulnerability of elderly people. As you said yourself, Chair, the next matter of interest, aside from today, will be the publication of HMIC's report in relation to the policing of the Bobby Story funeral. And like yourselves, we'll wait that commentary with interest to see if there are any lessons learned in relation to the policing of that funeral.
Okay, thank you very much, Simon, for your report. We're now going to take questions relating to that. And the first question I'm going to turn to Joanne Bunting. Joanne.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, Chief Constable, for your report. This is the first time we've spoken since the attack on one of your officers and staff, and we pass on our best regards to her and to the other officers serving in what is a very difficult time. Chief, I have 3 questions. I appreciate that we're on the live feed now, so you're in the middle of a live investigation on 2 of these issues, so I understand that you'll not be able to share fully. I'd like first of all, for an update, to ask you for an update on the No Don investigation. I also would like an update on the large-scale sexual abuse investigation in Fermanagh South Tyrone. And lastly, I want to ask you a question with regard to, you've had successes, a lot of successes against organised crime gangs this past number of months. And we get reports regularly from the Paramilitary Crime Task Force and the NCA, and the groups that are included there, including dissident Republicans. However, there is a gap that I think needs to be addressed. And it is that in all of this, in April, you made mention of the PSNI's assessment of the IRA Army Council and its links to political parties in Northern Ireland. We seldom then get reports on their activity, their capacity. And I think we need to look at this because there is a feeling that it's not mentioned because of political expedience. So in these circumstances, and I appreciate that the majority of this work is led by security services, but where there's a PSNI element, I think there's a whole criminal element on whom we as a board don't receive reports or scrutiny. And I think that needs to be rectified. Could you give me your comments on this, please?
Thanks, Joanne. Firstly, in terms of comments to the injured, the attacks on officers, I will be visiting both of them in a couple of weeks personally, just to see that everything has been done that we promised. And I'll pass on your comments. Every time we've had a chance to speak to people in that space, it has been encouraging to sort of reflect the support from people, as I said earlier. In relation to the three specifics, your signal just dropped out here at the start. I think you said Noah Donoghue. Yes. Well, clearly, you recall that I met Fiona a few weeks ago to listen to some of her concerns. We spent over an hour with her and her sister and legal representative, myself and John McVeigh, to listen to her concerns and ideas. And we've now written back to her and her solicitor to try and sort of establish some of the issues that she mentioned. Have we got a clear understanding of what she was worried about in terms of gaps in the investigation from their point of view? We did clear that approach with the coroner, because obviously we have to respect that this is a coronial investigation. And we now wait reply to see that, for example, there are some things that John personally committed to doing to try and reassure her and people that we haven't missed any opportunities, and that we've thrown all the expertise we can, both personally and in technological terms, to actually try and bring some clarity and resolution to this tragic death. So I can't say a lot more than that at the moment because of the space we have to allow the coroner to operate. But clearly, at the point of significant developments, we'll see how we can share that with people. But clearly, all eyes are set to the inquest. In the sexual abuse one, I don't want to sort of misspeak. Do you mean the one in Fermanagh? There's a few bits we've talked upon. What are the specifics there that?
It's the case I've spoken to you before. There was a considerable delay in commencing the investigation.
Yeah.
I'm aware that it's underway now, but I would appreciate an update as to where we are with that, insofar as you can.
Yeah, okay. I'm not sure we've got that specifics in front of us today. It may be better to do with a written answer through John, who is on the call, to Joanne, so we give you a fulsome response. And clearly, the IRA Council question, you referenced it yourself, the responsibility of either the IRC or the partner agencies in making assessments. It may be something that we'll have to discuss with yourself and maybe the chair offline about how we brief on sensitive matters, because there is, from our point of view, we stand by the earlier comments. There's no change to the 2015 commentary. We do provide updates in relation to, you talked before about the work of the Paramilitary Crime Task Force, about specific operations against specific paramilitary groups. So we'll have to sort of try and work out if there's something we're missing that we can legitimately talk about in terms of your areas of concern.
Okay,
Thank you, Chairman. I mean, that's fair enough, and I appreciate that. But I also think it's a conversation that the board needs to have, because there's a significant gap there. And how can we fully scrutinise in circumstances where one group is completely omitted? Thank you.
Thanks, Joanne. Okay, I'm just to give people heads up as to what's coming. It'd be Liz Kimmins up next, and then Tom Buchanan, and I'll give you 2 in advance each time so that you're ready. Liz.
Thank you, Chair, and thanks for the report today, Chief Constable. Mine's just an issue in relation to the recent racist attacks on the Jewish graves in Belfast City Cemetery, and also on the Syrian family in my own area in Uri. And it was just to ask if there's any update on the progress of those investigations, and what are the PSNI doing in relation to this. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Liz. Both quite awful events, aren't they, in terms of hate crime. In relation to the attacks on the Jewish graves in the city cemetery in Belfast, the neighbourhood policing team, who I've recently out on patrol with myself, has met with partners about the incident and also the ongoing issue of security in the cemetery, and it's now a priority patrolling location. We have increased visible presence in the area to deter further attack and reassure the community. And we are actually working with partners in a problem-solving space to look at other opportunities to try and design out the risk of any further crime. But there's no specific update on people being arrested. Similarly, the attacks on the Syrian family in Uri were horrible, where windows were smashed and graffiti painted outside the house. There is a hate crime investigation that's carrying on at the moment, which has been led by the neighbourhood policing team. And there's some work in relation to some support from the PCSP in relation to the broader issues for community confidence. But if you want specifics beyond that, we can reply in writing.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Next up, Tom Buchanan, and Tom will be followed by, lost my place here. We'll be followed by Michael Atkinson. So Tom Buchanan first.
Thank you, Chair. And again, Chief, thank you for your report today. And like others, can I condemn the attacks on the police officers right across the area, and again wish them a speedy recovery. And obviously, in recent times, the week
Sorry, Tom.
We can't hear
Tom,
that.
we've lost you in Wi-Fi. I'll come back to you in a second again. We'll take Michael's question first. We lost you through, and it must be Wi-Fi down a bit. I'll come back to you in a tick, Tom. Michael, would you like to ask your question?
Yeah, sure. Am I coming through okay, Chair? Can you hear me all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
I just, Chief Constable, good afternoon to you and your team, and thanks very much for the detailed report. I'd like to move just to the area that was mentioned in the Chair's intro around domestic violence and abuse, which is obviously a very important area for us at the moment. On the 21st of April of this year, the CJI issued a review report which really considered progress made on recommendations made in an earlier CJI report in 2019, which was a thematic inspection of the handling of domestic violence and abuse cases by the criminal justice system. Now that report and the recommendations addressed issues not just with PSNI, but also a number of other key partners in the criminal justice scheme, the PPS, CJI and DOJ. The Chief Inspector of Criminal Justice in Northern Ireland, Jackie Durkin, has expressed her disappointment at the pace of progress to implement recommendations to improve how the criminal justice system handles cases of domestic violence and abuse. And in considering progress, the CJI highlights the significant achievement in the passage through the Northern Ireland Assembly and creation of the Domestic Abuse and Civil Proceedings Act that received royal assent in March of this year, but does level some criticism around the pace of progress in establishing an advocacy service to support victims around, for example, regional courts, etc. And while positive around PSNI preparations in a number of areas, highlight some specific concerns around the risk assessment process, the extent of risk sharing information between PSNI and PPS, and also the effectiveness of case building between PPS and PS&I from an early stage using the prosecution team approach. So I just wondered if the Chief Constable might update us on the steps being taken to address the concerns outlined by the CJI in the April 2021 report. And I do note that he has made some reference in his main report, but I just wondered if he could elaborate a wee bit more on some of the points I've mentioned. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Michael. And I think it's worth restating that tackling domestic abuse, as you know, it makes up just over a sixth of recorded crime here in Northern Ireland. It is a key priority for us. And one of the bits of encouraging news is that the number of people that we're able to charge for domestic violence with injury has been improving consistently and is monitored through the performance board that Mark now chairs. In relation to your questions, the risk assessment process, I think the acronym is DASH, isn't it? There's actually been some considerable work done since the Cegini report to improve the quality of the risk assessments. And actually, it's like all these things, isn't it? That the better the information goes in at the point of reporting or initial assessment from police colleagues, then it informs other partners in that process about what action to take. And we have had feedback actually from external partners about the referrals being sort of more fulsome and received more expeditiously. So that's an issue that is encouraging. There is some more work to be done in May about improvements, which we can probably come back to specifically. The second bit you touch on is the multi-agency risk assessment groups. That MARAC, I think, is the acronym. There has been a training needs analysis now done for that with partners, because I think it's worth stressing, as you appreciate, in this important space, we all have to work together, and progress is only fast as each partner is able to bring to bear here, because we all have different skills, attributes and responsibilities. But that, I think, is going to enable a sort of a where we are now and next steps presentation to sort of see how we make sure that key part of the process is both robust and informed by people making decisions where their skills and professional up-to-date evidence-based knowledge are met. And the third bit is about case building, and clearly this is crucial to the relationship with the PPS. The PPS, in fairness, are looking to appoint some specialist prosecutors, and I, in a separate life, through the criminal justice force, are keen to support the idea of a domestic abuse court as well, to bring that emphasis and consistency. So that again is an area where we recognise that obviously bringing swifter justice and good outcomes to victims is hugely important, albeit I think in fairness to the public protection branch, who are not the only part of the response to this awful crime, because local policing teams and neighbourhood officers will have their role to play, because you've effectively got a prevention part of things, particularly around where we see the repeat victimisation. You've got a response to incidents as they happen, and then obviously building confidence by swift and effective investigations. But they again are working at over a 70% sort of outcome rate for the cases that they're now holding in terms of domestic violence with injury. So where we've been able to bring additional focus and resource, we have brought results on behalf of victims. But I imagine as the year progresses, it's something we'll want to return to assure you and others that we're meeting the expectations of Cegini, but also improving service to victims.
The only point I'd add, because I mean I appreciate there's a lot of positive evidence coming back, Chief Constable, and you've alluded to it. In your report, you do spend a couple of paragraphs on domestic abuse, and I suppose, given that CJI report had, I think, just 3 or 4 strategic recommendations within it, I wondered if you could maybe just point a few words against each of those key recommendations in your reports over the next few months, maybe to bring a wee bit more structure, as you have done on some of the Gillen work, which is very informative in the report as well, without making it any, unnecessarily voluminous or whatever. No, well, I mean, in a sense, we need to make progress. So what we do internally, we should be able to share with yourselves. So probably through the chair, it's about looking at timeframes in which committee it's best to bring that information probably to partnership and to brief people about what we're doing and the plans for the future as well.
Okay, good. Thank you for
Thank
that. We wait with interest to see the updates coming through. Tom, we'll give it another go with your question. If we don't hear it, we'll maybe ask you to put the camera off, and try again. But try for now and see if we can get it through. Tom.
Okay, do you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And again, Chief Con, I was just making reference before I was cut off to the officers in Fintona who had been subject to abuse due to a COVID-related issue, and wishing them well. But in light of all of the officers that have been attacked, what are the PSNI actually doing to not only protect the welfare of these officers in situations such as this, but also those in relation to terrorism and terrorist-related activity, where officers are on the front line and are subject and vulnerable to such attacks? And I suppose one other issue on the officers and on the confidence within police officers, I did note that a tweet that you put out with regards to a female officer who played in the Northern Ireland's women's football team was soon to be removed because of negative comments. Can I ask you, sorry then, what confidence does that build within those officers, where you're not prepared to stand by a congratulatory comment simply because of a few people who are not happy with the PSNI and will never maybe be happy with them?
Thanks, Tom. A couple of bits there. In relation to that social media post, I'll be careful what I say, but the post was to reflect the contribution of an individual, and then it was removed at the request of an individual. So it was initiated with her support, and then it was removed, and we have to respect that. So, and it is a shame that something that was seen as something to be proud of attracted that sort of reaction. Maybe that's just a reflection of some of the other troubling times that people have to address in their professional lives. On the relation to what we do for officers, I think there's a number of things here. Again, it may be something we can read for more detail, Tom, because clearly it starts in training and equipment when people have to face the sort of the intensity of disorder that we saw in recent weeks. It's about confidence in tactics and the decisions made of senior leaders. And I have to say, Mark and I were out and around a lot during the period of disorder, both sort of supporting and visiting officers right across the country in the field, as it were, as well as in and out of some of the command centres. And I was hugely impressed by the thought and energy and commitment at all levels to step forward to deal with the disorder and to protect communities. And I think there was some marvellous leadership that was shown, as well as some real tenacious policing in the face at times of some quite sustained disorder. In terms of the support for colleagues, we make reference to one real piece of innovation, which I think is unique in a UK sense, is the wellbeing hubs. These are, I don't know if you got a chance to saw them yourself, but they will be established and stood down in periods like this, where they're effectively a place where people can sort of regroup mentally, sometimes before they go out on duty, sometimes in the midst of it. And it's supported as well by volunteers from across the organisation, as you see in the report from the ambulance service. And there is an opportunity, if people got specific issues, we can offer more mental health support. There was the 9-point plan, which we can obviously come and brief more specifics on, which we introduced last year, where officers are injured, there are specific commitments between us, the officer, supervisors, and follow-up to make sure they get adequate protection. And then in the quite troubling circumstances that we've seen recently, which you referenced both in Dungiven and Larne, there are a range of things that have been done, both by ourselves and in fairness support offered by the Police Federation as well, to reassure the individual and their families, because it's not just them that's affected by these awful issues, to make sure that we do all that we can in crime prevention and enhancing security protection at vulnerable locations like we've seen. But also the bit that I've stressed, that people aren't forgotten, that obviously in outrageous crimes, there's a lot of emphasis in the moment, and there's all sorts of decisions that individuals have to make. But actually, I think the thing we need to be sure on, that actually a few weeks down the line we continue that support, because I think that's crucial to the almost covenant between the organisation and individuals. So I know, for example, in relation to the 2 crimes that you've mentioned, I'll be personally visiting them in a few weeks to actually test that all the commitments we've made have been met. So there is quite a lot we're doing. I don't think I've missed anything on that.
I suppose just additionally, and Pamela may wish to comment, but following the last 2 events, which are thankfully more exceptional than they used to be, Pamela and her team in the welfare are actually going through sort of a review of everything we're offering. And I don't know, Pamela, if you want to just comment on that.
I think it's just to pick up on those points, Tom, that it is holistically looking at the families and the support around, some practical support that we can support the individuals with, the staff members and officers, but wider peer support and ongoing OC health support and other supports that we can do. But I think in the more recent incident, it is recognising the support not just for the police staff or police officer, but indeed their families as well. And certainly through HR, we have a very rigorous process now of following that up back to the Chief Constable's remarks that that is a sustained, continued support, and that it isn't just at a point in time, but that we consider the needs of the staff going forward.
Okay. Thank you for that, Chair.
Thanks, Tom, and you sound much better at full speed than you did in slow motion earlier, so thanks for bearing with us. We're going to come to questions on legacy, which will be Dolores and then Jerry, but just before we do, I would also like to mention the Wellbeing Hub, which the Chief referenced there. I mean, I have to say, and I've said this to him before, I think it's an excellent idea, both talking to people as they go on duty and as they come off duty again, to address mental health issues and deliver support. And I think it's something potentially could be rolled out much more widely than just the PSNI. I think there are lots of areas of business and elsewhere that this could be an exemplar for, because we know we're going to have a tsunami of mental health issues coming on the back of all the restrictions that COVID has brought to us. So well done for that initiative. I think it's very impressive. Okay, Dolores, legacy.
Thanks, Chair, and thanks, Chief, for the report, very comprehensive report. And with others, I'd want to condemn the attacks on officers from all of the previous incidents over the last few weeks, and wish them all a speedy recovery. In relation to legacy, I think one might say under the cover of darkness, the British government issued a statement of their intent to bring forward something in the Queen's speech. I just wonder what advance notice or discussions did the NIO or indeed the Secretary of State have with yourself or the senior management team in relation to that? And also the court case which was dismissed in relation to the murder of Joe McCann. There was criticism by the judge of the PSNI and the PPS. I wonder, can you provide us with any insight into those comments? And I'm sure it's something that I certainly as a board member and others may wish to come back to at a later stage in relation to legacy in general within the police.
Thanks, Dolores. 2 issues there. I'll ask Mark to address the second bit, because he's got a lot of personal knowledge in relation to the Joe McCann case. In relation to the specifics, I haven't had a conversation with the Secretary of State in relation to what would appear in the public domain today. I think many people on the call will probably get a sense of anticipation that something was going to be announced. And we did have an indication from the NAO that something would be said on the 11th of May. But we are no cited in terms of the detail than what has been put out in the public domain today. So whether that actually reflects the true commentary of what's in the Queen's speech, I mean, I wouldn't judge that in terms of breaching of confidence, even if we knew, but I can't really say much more than that, that something has appeared today. We weren't cited on it, and matters will take their course now until the 11th of June and seeing if what's being reported is indeed entirely accurate.
Could I ask though, Chief, I mean, I wonder, Chief, is it fair? I know other Chief Constables have made their views known in the past, but as a police officer, do you support what amounts to de facto amnesty for perpetrators?
Well, I think before we sort of get into commentary, I haven't gone through the detail today, in fairness to Dolores, and I wouldn't want to just rush into an answer without seeing the full proposals, whether it's a headline set of statements, whether it is something that's very, very specific. So I think it's probably best that we can comment on in the June board meeting once, if the Queen's Speech story is accurate about what that means, because I wouldn't want to sort of take away from the Secretary of State what he feels he needs to say. So we can probably assess what's there accurately in a few days' time.
Chief, but it's really a personal reflection as well as that of a senior officer. I know others have expressed views they're not happy about amnesty as an approach to dealing with the past.
Yeah, well, we've said in previous occasions that we support the Stormont House Agreement. We've said that, you know, consistently over a number of years, and I've come to the board and talked about that. But I just don't want to get drawn at the moment until we've seen the specifics in the Queen's Speech, because we might end up setting a whole can of worms that we don't need to, because we haven't got any further insight at the moment. So I think the June board, with the chair's permission, is probably the best time to make commentary that's informed of all the detail that may or may not be in there. So, but do you want to?
Sure. So yes, the McCann judgment, and I'm aware of some of the comments made so far by the judge, and obviously we're all waiting for the judge's full written verdict on the case. It's a slightly unusual case in the sense that there was no prosecution file forwarded by the PSNI Legacy Investigation Branch. The prosecution was initiated in 2016 by the PPS following their review, as I understand it, of the original Royal Ulster Constabulary investigation in 1972, the inquest papers from 1973, and the 2010 Historical Inquiries Team review of the case, which they carried out in as I say, in 2010. It was on the basis of that review that, as I understand, the PPS issued prosecutorial directions and issued prosecutions against the 3 officers. PSNI's role then was to gather together and assemble the file, the paperwork, complete the disclosure process, and carry out any other necessary actions. These actions did not include any request to re-interview, arrest the soldiers concerned. So we did discharge any requests the PPS made to us, I'm informed, were discharged in their entirety. But it's slightly unusual in the sense that we didn't formally submit a prosecution file. So those are the kind of the broad details, Dolores, of our involvement in it. And clearly police involvement goes back to 1972. And we await obviously the final comments of the judge. But I can confirm that we didn't interview, the PSNI didn't interview these soldiers post the interviews by HET in 2010. HET submitted a report to the McCann family in 2012 containing the findings of its review, and we hadn't taken any proactive action since 2012, other than then when the PPS directed their prosecution.
Well, thank you for that. I think there will be issues. We'll want to come back and probe further, and we did discuss further in the private session about why the police, in terms of such an early murder, hadn't, following the HET report, reinvestigated, and I think PPS have questions to answer. But the PPS then, in response to the judgment, at this stage have said they're going to review other files in relation to military personnel that's currently before them. And can you confirm that those files are files that have been forwarded to the PPS for prosecution from the PSNI?
Yes, so I mean, to the best of my knowledge, any of the cases that are currently being assessed by the PPS or at court proceedings are as a result of an investigation file that has been prepared by Legacy Investigation Branch and forwarded to the PPS for either direction, and then onward to follow that direction and onward to the court.
And in your view, do any of those cases merit a double check, if you like, or is it too late for that at this stage, given that they're already with the PPS?
Well, the check of the evidence is effectively for the PPS. Dolores, I don't want to be drawing any specific case. If the PPS, on any file that we send to them, be it for a legacy matter or a current matter, the PPS have questions or further actions that they require the police to carry out, they write back to us and say, would you go and do X, Y, or Z? So those matters are entirely open to the PPS upon review of any case that they have to ask us to carry out further investigative action if we so fit, if they so feel we need to, or that's required. And if not, then they will still make their decision based upon the evidence that has been provided to them to date.
So based on that principle and the process, can then you confirm that the PPS did not ask the PSNI to re-interview the soldiers under caution?
Yes, my understanding is that the PPS did not ask us to re-interview the soldiers under caution, that the reliance was placed upon the interviews that the HET had carried out in their 2010 review as the soldiers' account. My understanding is they were cautioned in 2010, and that was the basis of their under caution interview, but there was no re-caution interview by the PSNI.
I think in all of this, we always have to remember the families and the victims, and obviously others will be anxious that they too are not going to see justice. Thank you.
Thanks, Dolores. Jerry, still on the theme of legacy, this time the Ombudsman's report 1969, and Mervyn will then be the next one up after Jerry. So Jerry Kelly.
Thank you, Chair. Let me add my voice to the condemnations of the number of attacks on police officers over the last number of weeks, and especially the attempted murder of the young woman reserve officer. So I think it's that the whole board, since this is the first board meeting, will be sending out that same message. In terms of the, you mentioned at the start, Chief Constable, about the killing by the RUC in 1969 of Patrick Rooney. He was a 9-year-old child, Hugh McCabe, Samuel McCarran, and Michael Lynch. And I would just want you to maybe say a wee bit more about that. I know you said that you agree with the Ombudsman's report, and frankly, it sounded more like a holding statement than anything. I mean, if I could say this with respect to the Chief Constable, you know, this was heavy machine gun fire, which was used indiscriminately, which killed 4 innocent people in Divis and in Ardoyne. And although it said that the deaths were found to be without good reason, it really doesn't state it, you know. And you are the Chief Constable. This is, I know it was a long time ago, but the family have now gone through another disappointment. And I think it beggars belief that they should say that there was not enough evidence when, of course, these incidents and some other incidents were used as the basis of the Scarman report at the time. So I'm inviting you to maybe say some more to the families who are listening to this, because I saw the statement out from the Deputy Chief Constable that seemed to me like a holding statement. One of the questions I want to ask was how long you have that report of the Ombudsman. And let me, without going through a whole thing, this is at the same time as Dolores pointed out, overnight, we're getting yet again this amnesty, this idea of impunity and immunity for state forces. And frankly, whatever way you look at it, whatever may be in the Queen's speech, this has been going on for some time. So let me ask you a policing question. Would an amnesty undermine the rule of law? Because I would say with some safety that all the political parties here are against.
Thanks, Joey. There are obviously a few bits there which I'll probably ask Miles to comment on as well, because he spent some time yesterday evening reading the Ombudsman's report, which is, if you've had a chance to see it yourself, is extensive. It's over 120 pages. And clearly, I think the thing you start with is you know, both professionally and personally, when you look at what you referenced, the death of a 9-year-old child, I mean, the unimaginable pain that has caused. And obviously, I'm telling you that the history you already know about the first child to die. So there's a huge recognition of the impact of that. I think I'll stand to be corrected, but not every victim was killed by heavy machine gun fire. I think there are specifics in the report about the assessment of, I'm not trying to differentiate when people have died, but just to correct the narrative. And she goes at some lengths to, as you've seen probably yourself, to critique the use of tactics in 1969 by the type of weaponry, where it was used, and the instructions that were given at the time. It is quite difficult, though, to try and put yourself back in time. You made some commentary about the standards of investigation and the reflection about what that means for us. But we can't, as we've said in some of the things that we've reflected on, we can't necessarily step back in time. And it's a consistent issue that comes up in the legacy space about the quality of investigations, sometimes, like in this case, over 50 years ago, through to some more recent times, in what was an extraordinary period of time in terms of the intensity of the violence that people went through. Do you want to put any specifics in relation to the report itself?
Well, we got a report for draft accuracy check a couple of months ago. Slightly unusual in the sense that because it was so old, we wrote back a very short letter saying that we weren't able to provide any accuracy check to it because there was nobody in the organisation in any detail of it. So it was sent back to the Ombudsman. I saw the final report. I don't know if it's changed, but I went through the final report yesterday, Jerry, and to say because it's 51 years old, and the Ombudsman is the person who's required to investigate this, we're relying upon her investigative conclusions. So we genuinely did say in this one that we just didn't have anything to add to it because it was so long ago and there was nobody in the organisation who could provide any kind of sense of an accuracy check, which we would normally do in Ombudsman's draft reports.
Let me finish with the question that I asked earlier on, and I emphasise it's a policing question. You have said, as other chief constables have said, that you support the Stormont House Agreement. The Stormont House Agreement rules out an amnesty and deals with the rule of law. So do you accept that an amnesty undermines the rule of law? In fact, it would end up ignoring it, because that is an important question to all the victims, including the families of these 4 people, and which is why I'm connecting them. That we're talking about here. And Joe McComm was mentioned earlier on. Our family are looking for answers in terms of that, which they are not getting in the court at the moment. But as a chief constable, I'm asking a straight question. Although, I mean, you may think it is some other aspect to it.
Yeah, well, I think it's clearly a hugely important issue, Jerry, and it references back to what Dolores was asking a few minutes ago. I just think the time to make considered commentary is once we've seen the actual detail of the Queen's speech, that there is clearly something in the public domain today. I just don't want to get drawn, as I said at the moment, because it's not fair to the legislative process that the Queen's speech means, and then to come back to the June board once we actually see the detail. I wouldn't want to make a pronunciation today on detail I haven't seen, nor actually the principle of amnesty can be applied. Now, I'd probably want to look legally at what that means myself, apart from the sort of common vernacular. So I just don't want to get drawn at the moment, given the fact that there's something going to happen next week, and let's see what the detail is. And I can probably in a more considered way come back with Mark to the June board and give our best assessment of actually what is proposed and what does it really mean.
Well, I'll finish with this, Chair, sorry, on the same point. You see, the point I'm trying to make is it's time to speak now, because if the legislation comes in, then what you will be saying to us is that is the law. Now, what I'm saying to you is, as a chief constable, this undermines the law. So I leave it with that, because you've said whatever you want to say today, but I mean, I think you should take that away and think about it.
Yeah. Okay,
thanks, Jerry. Mervyn up next, and he'll be followed by Mike. So Mervyn first.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you to the Chief Constable and to Mark and to his colleagues. I think just following on from the last comment, I think what undermines the rule of law has been the actions of illegal organisations such as the IRA that have heaped havoc and mayhem in Northern Ireland for far too long, the releasing of convicted terrorists from prison for political agendas, letters of comfort, royal pardons, and ignoring COVID regulations so that you can have a public display on the streets of Belfast and still having an IRA Army Council in existence. I think all of those things undermine the rule of law. And I do have to say, it is beyond belief that we still have people today who have a very, very narrow view of what it means to keep the law, stay within the law, and not justify terrorist activities. So, Chief Constable, let me start by saying we join with the condemnation against the attacks on police officers wherever they have happened and for whatever reason anybody may try to use to justify them. And we send our best wishes to your colleagues as they carry out what is always very, very difficult circumstances. Your opening comments, I have to say, are to be welcomed today at the board, in that you are listening to the unionist community, because for far too long, I think we have seen and we have expressed at this board a concern about many of the things that we've rehearsed. But can you give an assurance that with the various structures that has been established recently, independent advisory group, community curators program, community relations task force, that they will, without any equivocation, include the relevant and the people in my community and in the unionist community who genuinely want their voice to be heard, but feel very isolated and very much ignored, and that they want to play a part in ensuring that their voice is heard. And then finally, following on from the answer to my colleague, Joanne Bunting, confirming the PSI assessment of the continued existence of the IRA Army Council and its relationship with a political party in Northern Ireland. Can you also give us an update as to what is the situation with regards to the comments that have been made by the former Chief Constable about the murder of Kevin McGuigan, and when he said in a recent comment that he has made that that murder took place with the knowledge and concurrence of senior figures within the Republican movement. However, at the time of the murder in 2015, the police then said that they had no information. If it's openness and transparency that people want, then it's openness and transparency that we must get.
Thanks, Mervyn. Well, firstly, going to the initial comments you made in relation to support for officers, as we said, we'll keep feeding them back in. Certainly, I can give that unequivocal assurance that things like the independent advisory group, which again through the chair we can see how people want to see how it is working. I've met the independent advisory group 4 or 5 times now, and they are drawn from communities right across the country. I think sometimes there may be a misunderstanding that they're only there to give advice about the matters that fell out of the Black Lives Matter report in December. They're not actually, Mervyn. That we've used them a lot in the last few months to give insight, critique about a variety of police responses. I've done it personally. Bobby Singleton, I know, has run a number of meetings, and we're encouraging senior colleagues to use them as a resource, because they will give you a challenge and they'll give you a perspective. And I pay tribute to them, really. I've enjoyed every session I've had. I've come away better informed than when I started, but they are there to give views and opinions about policing operations, policing tactics and policing style. And absolutely, given the commentary that has been with us for a few weeks at least, to try and help us wrestle with the 2-tier policing question. Similarly, whilst the genesis of the Community Relations Task Force fell out of the December report, I've been very clear with Bobby Singleton, who is now leading this work for us and doing a really good job, it has to be said, that the task force, again, is about improving how we have a relationship with all the communities that we police. And so if there's any sort of misunderstanding about their reach, it started in a particular place. We're looking at third-party support, and we're looking at innovation to make it a sort of broad framework we can use to best effect to say where we need to look at an evidence-based approach to making sure that policing is even-handed, fair and legitimate for everybody. So we can keep briefing. I think from memory, Bobby's due to come back in June with a more fulsome update. He does have a detailed engagement plan specifically around the PUL community now that I've seen, and I've been working with him both personally and organisationally to reach out to people and show us, as you said, Mervyn, that we are listening and understanding. We can keep coming back to that at the sort of the pace of the board, but equally in relation to the second question, I've had no conversation with the former Chief Constable since he made his comments. So I think the issue we have to recognise is, as has been alluded to in the commentary at the time, there is, again, a coronial process here where there will be full disclosure made about the matters in hand. And I can't really say much more than that at the moment. We have taken, Mark and I commissioned some work the other week when this came up to see if there's anything that we don't know about. But I'm sure he'll be able to stand behind his comments in the fullness of time. But I don't really think it's worth me saying anything else at the moment, given the coroner's role in this. I wouldn't want to second guess what he may determine. But as that process takes place, we can come back and explain issues to the board more fully.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mike will be next, and then Trevor. Now that will conclude all that I've seen from public session questions. There were a number in private, which I don't think need to be repeated in public, but if anybody feels they have a burning question, please do indicate. Otherwise, we'll be finishing off with Mike and then Trevor. No indication. So, okay, Mike up next.
Chair, thank you. I also stand in solidarity with members of the PSNM family who've been attacked in Dungiven and Larne and Clinton and elsewhere. My question, Chief Constable, relates to the 4-page letter you received on the 2nd of April from Stephen Heron on behalf of the PPS. It's headlined, PPS Decisions on Prosecution re Bobby Story Funeral. It's within the context of saying he believes it's important neither of us does anything that would compromise the integrity of our offices, cause damage to the longer-term working relationships between police and prosecutors, or potentially compromise future proceedings. His complaint is with regard to communications. He said, while the PPS gave the PSNI timely advance notice of what the PPS were going to put into the public domain, the PSNI did not reciprocate despite several requests. And the consequence of that was that they didn't have the opportunity to complain and warn against you putting into the public domain the fact the PSNI were seeking prosecutions. He said it's a well-recognized approach, both in this jurisdiction and in England and Wales, that should be a confidential request and should not be made public. He goes on to say the consequence of that is that you undermine the Deputy Director of the PPS and the spirit of confidentiality. He also claims that at no point did the PSNI investigating officers make clear to the prosecutors that you wanted to see prosecutions, either verbally or in writing. And in fact, you only did it by ticking a certain box on the PSNI niche system. And he goes as far as to say, some might think that you did that because you were only doing it for the optics. So I think it's an incredibly serious series of allegations within this letter. And my question is, how did you respond?
Well, we have given a brief reply back once we got the letter, Mike. We are in a space at the moment where the PPS are reviewing their decision and don't want to get to the space where we say anything else that might jeopardise that. I think it's probably fair to say in the detail, there are reasons for what we're done, when and why, which we can probably give a better response, more fulsome in writing to you. I can't speak for Mark Webster, who was the independent officer that we brought in to oversee the investigation. At the end of the day, I was very clear from the brief that I had that we had recommended prosecution, and the way to to do that was to fill in the relevant paperwork that would normally go with the file. I haven't got the Stephen Heron's letter in front of me, but the other issue was that that in relation to the events on the day, we were still unclear about what the final determination was going to be. So because we didn't know that ourselves, we couldn't actually share with the PPS our response, because that might have been misplaced. From recollection, there was a media briefing by the PPS at 1 o'clock, and we were effectively brought in to respond to that because of other commentary by other people very quickly thereafter. And that probably caused some of the issues that he is concerned about. There wasn't a deliberate attempt to undermine or seek conflict, but as we still see at the moment, because the decision was, I suppose, momentous, in some terms controversial, we felt we had to quickly explain our position.
Do you agree with Mr. Heron when he says that it is a well-recognised approach, both in this jurisdiction and in England and Wales, that such communications are confidential and should not be made public?
I don't know the position in England and Wales. I'd have to check the position, but we just felt that given the enormity of what was emerging in front of us, we needed to make it plain unequivocally, because we'd been accused of collusion, that we had recommended prosecution.
Okay, I know that HMIC, FRS are looking at this, so I'll leave it there, Chief Constable, but I just emphasise, I think these are very serious allegations that are coming out. Could I ask you, if the Chair will indulge me, ask you about the budget? You make reference in your report to the additional 12.3 million that's coming your way. In one paragraph in your report, you say the bulk of it will go to retain staff, so that you won't have to drop from 7,000 to 6,700. But in the next paragraph, you say the whole 12.3 million will go to recruitment. Those two assertions don't add up, do they?
Perhaps a good chance to bring Pamela in onto the call, actually, because she's been doing all the work to share where we're at with both the budget and the forthcoming resource plan. Mike.
Yeah. I'm happy to pick that up, Mike. Yes, and apologies if it's confusing. I suppose it's 2 points of time. So as we entered the year where we were looking at a flat cash budget, one of the mechanisms to save that money was to reduce our headcount. At the time, we were saying that would be 300 officers. So we were sitting around February with just over 6,900, if we say 7,000 for ease of numbers. And we would have had to have dropped those to 6,700 to save sufficient money to keep us break even for the year. We are delighted, both with the support of the board and the department, that through June monitoring, we will secure the 12.3 million. 9.8 of that was to effectively enable us not to have to take those reductions of 300. So keep in and around the 7,000 officers. And then an additional 2.5 million was provided to recruit 100 additional officers, taking us up to 7,100. So does that help clarify the position just on the headcount and the budget?
Yeah, well, that's in one paragraph, Pamela, yeah, the 9.8 and the 2.5.
Yeah.
But the next paragraph reads, the additional 12.3 million funding will be targeted directly on officer and staff recruitment.
Yes.
Which implies the whole thing is going on recruitment, whereas the previous paragraph says the bulk of it is going on retention.
Well, recruitment and retention, I mean, obviously there's an attrition level, Mike, within the officer headcount, and I'm looking at what we're anticipating that to be. So we would naturally have around 300 leavers on the police officer side in any 1 year. So we're needing to recruit up to 460 to get that additionality to bring us up to 7,100. So the investment is, I suppose the commitment we always gave was any additional money secured through Department of Justice and Finance for 21-22 would be prioritised on maintaining, and hence a little bit also of increasing our headcount, and that any other financial pressure in a non-pay way we would realise and find ourselves. So we're protecting the money coming through is to protect the headcount going into 21-22.
Okay, so to retain headcount, you have to recruit.
Yes, we do, because we have a natural, we lose 300 officers a year and about 150 police staff. So without getting the money, we would have not been replacing those, and that would have had a dramatic impact on our headcount.
Okay, just maybe it's just me, but that had been articulated in the document.
That's a fair enough point, but hopefully it's clear. Yeah. No.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, Trevor, your turn to close the show. Last question.
Thank you, Chair. I suppose, I mean, like other colleagues, I would like to join on their comments of condemnation against the officers, particularly the off-duty officers who were attacked. And like others, I'd like to send my best wishes. And also the officer who was on duty. I hope that officer has made a good recovery after the vicious attacking them with a knife where they discharged the gun. I hope that the police stands by that person by protecting their life whenever they felt their life in danger. But just going on to my main question, Chair, I have a particular interest in the Mucklemore Abbey case. And I mean, I want to congratulate the police thus far in terms of getting to a successful conclusion for some of those cases. And we're seeing some of those now coming through, the PPS announcing that they're taking those cases on. Today, we read about another person arrested in the Mucklemore Abbey. But for me, and as I did highlight in the private session, I raised this about a year ago with ACC Barbara Gray. And I accept in her answer, there was thousands of hours of tape to review. But I think we're now at the stage that there's an opinion that this is like a drip feed. And this is not only for, I'm not asking this question only for some of the relatives or the patients, but indeed the staff, because I think there's a cloud of suspicion and concern over everyone in relation to Mucklemore Abbey. So really what I'm asking the Chief Constable is what possibility or what's the opportunities to actually find additional resources? And I know they're into double figures in terms of dedicated resources to that, but what's the opportunity to find additional resources to try and bring some sort of conclusion? Because as this runs on, people have lost confidence and have concerns in the system. This is no criticism of the police indeed, but we need to get to a conclusion where people are satisfied that where some of the most vulnerable people in society are being cared for in an appropriate manner, and indeed there's protection also for the staff. So my question is then about the resourcing of that going forward.
Yeah, so Trevor, yeah, it is a very important case, and you're right, there's been a lot of progress. There's been 19 arrests so far. The first file went in for 7 prosecution decisions, the second file is now in, and a third file is expected at the end of the summer. And there are, yeah, I mean, there's about 19 staff. We're letting posts allocated to this. There's some vacancies at the minute, and they're looking for more people at the minute. And we have an advert out for extra people to come and to do the CCTV work. But at the current rate of going, we're still a few more years at this. To be honest, there's so much more to go through. So you've raised a point about drip. I suppose our approach had been to try and push the prosecution files to the PPS as we got through each suspect and get those moving. And I probably still feel that's appropriate for us to do, as opposed to holding it all together and putting a file at the end. But unfortunately, Trevor, at the minute, I can't offer too much comfort around this being resolved, in the short term. You've raised the question. We will have a discussion with the Public Protection Unit about the prioritisation of the resources. Pamela and I can also look about whether or not other resources should be put there. I do know that the Chief Superintendent in there, with the resources that he has available to him at the minute, without additionality, is constantly trying to balance between what we describe as cases of live cases where we think harm is happening at the minute and stuff that's more historic. And in this one, there are control measures in place because there are so many staff that have been taken out of the situation, and there have been control measures in place to hopefully stop any current offending. Whereas we do have within the Public Protection Unit, as you well know, Trevor, lots of other cases where there's lots of current offending. So I will take this away, Trevor, and we'll have a look at it. It would probably mean putting extra resources into the PPU, but I do think it's only fair we're honest about this. There's still a long tail to go with this yet, Trevor. It'd be wrong of me to indicate otherwise. This could be another 3-4 years at the current rate of going. But I think it's important also that I listen to the concerns that you've raised with me today.
And I appreciate the way you've outlined that. And I mean, I know you've always been upfront in relation to how this investigation will pan out. But you do talk about historic cases. For me, and my concern in this is some of the cases that I'm concerned about are not historic. Some of these cases have been going on within the last number of months. And for me and the families concerned, I think that's where the strong case should be made to get additional resources to make sure that we can get to the bottom of all of this. And I mean, let's not leave out, some staff are innocent here as well, and there's a cloud of suspicion over them, and they're living with that day and daily. So all staff are not guilty of any misdemeanors, but there's a cloud of suspicion over everyone, and so many people need to get moving on with their lives. But particularly, I feel really desperate for those vulnerable people who have not got a voice. And I mean, I appreciate what has been done, but I would implore you to do what you can to try and get additional resources in there till we get this to an end.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that, Trevor. And I think we all want to record our concern for the families who are going through a lengthy. They've already been through a trauma, and the lengthening process that's still to be worked through is something which adds to that trauma, and that's certainly something that we'd want to see abbreviated by as much as is possible too. So glad that Mark is looking again at the resources being placed into this. Okay, thank you all very much indeed for today. Our next meeting in public will be Thursday, the 3rd of June. I hope you'll be able to join us then, and I hope by then to have been able to update my pre-Christmas haircut. A lot of my colleagues have got theirs looking in much better shape than I have, but the queues at the barbers where I live are clearly much longer than they are elsewhere, or I just don't have the influence to jump the queues in the way that others have. But anyway, thank you very much for joining us today, and we look forward to seeing you again on the 3rd of June. Thanks.